Hey lovelies, Lisa here with another installment in my Learn to Speak Tarot series, a series of videos in which I'm exploring what it means to become fluent in this language of 78, maybe we want to say 78 words each card, right? Now 78, English has over 200,000 words in it. It's a very rich language, and new words are being coined all the time. 78 words, not a lot to play with, and yet tarot, through the language of the cards, through the mandala of the cards, we somehow manage to say and hear and feel and express everything we need. And part of that is because there are three components to each of the 78 cards, three principles, as I've said in the past, that help give that card its signifying meaning, its ability to say stuff. And those three components are image, so the picture with all of its, which can be rich in symbolism, which can be very naturalistic, which can have so many different moving pieces to it. So image, number, right? So the Three of Cups is first and foremost a 3. So, right, tarot is a language of number. And then finally, the third principle, arrangement. So how the suit elements, which allow us to understand the number, are arranged on the card, or how the artistic composition gives us a kind of abstract presentation all its own, independent of the picture itself. So one way, just to illustrate what I'm talking about with the classic Rider-Waite, and this, by the way, is the AGM Urania deluxe English version of the premium of Von A.E. Waite deck. So it's got the crackle back, and it doesn't have Pixie's calligraphy, but it has beautiful cardstock and pristine colors and lines. It's a beautiful deck, and I love to use it. It's this big format. I love to use it for learning and presentation. I don't read with it, but I teach with it. So here is the Six of Pentacles, right? So there's a picture here, and we read the picture according to everything we know about Western culture. So we're interpreting, when we look at this picture, we're interpreting the clothing. We're understanding that these are beggars, they're poor people. We understand that this is someone who is of wealth and means. We're seeing the balance that he's carrying here, and that both we understand, oh, that's how you might weigh out a resource like gold or money or food or whatever. But we also understand through this its symbolic meaning, referring to Libra, in astrology, referring to justice. We might relate that to other cards in the deck, like the Trump of Justice. And we have, color, right? We also then have, so that's all at the level of image. We also then have number. And in any deck that we're working with, we might be first and foremost interested in how the number is portrayed. So in the classic Waite-Smith cards, it's all Roman numerals except for the Fool, which is a 0. Now, there was no 0 in the system of Roman numbers, so that's kind of interesting. There's a lot to say about that. I've thought about that myself. But whether we're dealing with Hindu Arabic numbers, like, the classic 6, or Roman numbers, that might be interesting to us for different reasons, partly because Roman numbers draw attention to themselves as letters. But then there's also number as represented by the suit element. So we might have a deck of cards that doesn't have a number listed, but then we read the suit elements, which kind of leap out of the image. If this is a scenic pip or a scenic deck, the suit elements sort of stand out at this like other kind of plane of representation, this other level of representation. Okay, so number, how is it portrayed? What is the number? How might we think about what 6s mean to us? Okay, we might think about Pythagorean number theory. We might think about astrology, and we might think about sort of naturalistic understandings of 6, what mythological understandings of 6, all the ways in which we might interpret number. And then we come to the third component, the third principle, that tarot is a language of arrangement. And here we might think about the composition of the image, right? So we've got highs and lows. We've got this triad that appears in many cards, like the Lovers, where we have a top figure and then two figures below, and the angel kind of mediates or resolves the tension between male and female. Or the Chariot, this sort of structure, this triangular structure, the geometry of the image, right? Arrangement is also another word for arrangement, might be tarot is a language of geometry. The geometry of triangles, really important to the tarot deck. We see it in the trumps all over the place. So the triangle that resolves the tension between black and white, perhaps base and noble, or bad and good, or shadow and light, is resolved by the charioteer, a figure of the ego, of the self. The relationship of that triangle that we saw in the Lovers gets echoed again. Sorry, I'm sorting through my deck. In the Devil, this demonic figure as opposed to the mediating figure of the angel. So tarot is a language of arrangement, of geometry, and that geometry gets expressed in the naturalistic image in some decks, quite obviously, quite self-consciously. But arrangement also relates to the way suit elements that help us represent the number, the 6, are displayed on the page, on the card. And here, you know, interestingly, in this Six of Pentacles, the suit elements echo the structure of the balance of the scales. But interestingly, these scales are not equal. And we might interpret that. We might think to ourselves, so here we have the 6 with its imagery of generosity and nobility. And, you know, there's a sense here of how do we make up for the differences in the world, the way that there are haves and have-nots. And we might try to balance the scales in a world that seems unjust, but the suit element in its number 6 shows us, well, the scales aren't quite balanced, right? This side hangs lower, and it's the side where we see the merchant or the nobleman giving his wealth. So I always look at this card and I think, this guy in teal, he ain't going to get nothing, right? You know, in the world of philanthropy and donation and giving and generosity, we may try to even the scales, but inevitably some imbalances remain. Okay, so that was a way to talk about the 3 principles of tarot in general, but especially to focus on the geometry or arrangement of the numbers in a card, of the elements in a card. I have been thinking, as have a lot of us, about sacred geometry. So the main thing I want to say about sacred geometry, besides pointing you to a really hilarious Looney Tunes video that about sacred geometry, so if you look in the links below, you'll see that. Fantastic, really worth the watch. And it's a reminder that, you know, back in the early days of cartoons, there was a little bit more content maybe than we see in your average Saturday morning cartoon nowadays. So I highly recommend that Looney Tune introduction to sacred geometry, because it'll give you a sense of the history going back to the ancient Greeks, and also an introduction to sort of key concepts like the golden mean, the golden ratio, also called the extreme mean. There are a lot of different names for it. And I also want to point you to this really great Khan Academy video about the golden ratio, which is where I went when I was trying to just get the mathematics of it straight. Like, I'm not a math person, and I found it really helpful. I'm not a math person, but I don't hate math. If you absolutely hate math, the Khan Academy video may drive you crazy. But golden ratio. So in general, geometry is always thinking about ratio. Ratio is just relationship, the relationship of this to that, you know, of 2 to 3, of this set of stuff over here to that set of stuff over there. And, you know, where arithmetic, for instance, or, you know, working with numbers in mathematics might be doing that at an abstract level, you know, like 2 + 2 = 4. What's the relationship of a 2 and another 2? It equals 4. Geometry is thinking about that spatially. It's thinking about arrangement, right? So how does a world that's filled with a bunch of stuff, how does that world of parts, of things, of moving pieces, of flotsam and jetsam, of things like birds and trees and humans and automobiles and decks of tarot cards, a world of stuff, how does that world of stuff become coherent in terms of relationships among groups of things, among individuals? Geometry is thinking about arrangement through space, about relationship through space. Sacred geometry is trying to do that thinking, and sort of in the broadest sense of the term, sacred geometry is trying to do that thinking about arrangement in space as a way of moving from multiplicity to unity. So sacred geometry has this fundamental esoteric core to it, which is why, you know, when you look at a, you know, one of the ancients, like Pythagoras, you know, when he's working with geometry, right, when he's working with number, Pythagoras is trying to think about the one with a capital O, the one, the whole, God, divinity. He's trying to think about how do we get from moving pieces and moving parts and a world of multiplicity back to divinity, to the one, to the truth with a capital T. That's what sacred geometry is doing. And that's why the golden ratio, like the relationship of all relationships within geometry, like the one that is so cool that we just have to keep talking about it, that's why the golden ratio is important. The golden ratio is an incredible example, a really like weird and powerful example of how relationships of parts to each other can somehow take us back to unity, that this world might not be so random and incoherent, but might in fact have underlying meaning, underlying coherence. So at the heart, now this is going to be like whiteboard. This is like Lisa, not tech savvy Lisa. And I don't even know if I can, let's see if I can do this a little bit more nicely. So the golden ratio begins with this thinking about a segment, a line segment, okay? And I'm going to talk more about lines and points and shapes in another video. But for now, I just want to talk about the golden ratio. So the golden ratio, which actually is a number, the number phi, that's the Greek letter phi. And then this is, I mean, there's a number, we can figure it out. It's, you know, 1.618003398 repeating. It's an irrational number, so it goes on forever, not repeating itself. It's not a repeating decimal. But phi is the number where it's true that a line, when it's broken into two unequal segments of A and B, the relationship of the longer segment A to the shorter segment B equals the relationship of the whole line, there's that movement toward unity, to the longer segment. So this longer segment A plus this longer segment B, when we take whatever number that is, whatever that distance is, over the longer segment A, is the same relationship, the same number as A to B. So phi is, if we figure out, you know, what length this line should be using whatever units we do, phi is the number where this equals that. And actually what that comes down to sort of is, not sort of exactly, is that A is the square root of 5, which is approximately 2.23, plus 1 over 2. So the length of this line, if it were in inches, it would be, you know, approximately 3.3 inches, and this B would be 2 inches, right? And that is, when we divide that out, right? 2 into 3.23, roughly speaking, we get 1.618, blah, 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 blah. That's pretty cool. But why do we care about that? Because this number keeps showing up. And this is where we get to this really, really cool shape, the golden rectangle. So what happens when we take a rectangle whose width is B and whose length is A? What we discover with that rectangle, right, is that we can then create a square of width B and width B, so a square, and then that leaves us with this other rectangle, and this other rectangle, if we then divide that into component parts, right, we end up getting these golden ratios all over the place. So if we make a rectangle using the idea of the golden ratio to determine the length of the rectangle and the width of the rectangle, it will hold in it other little mini golden rectangles, all of which end up giving us the golden ratio. And this is where we get, and here's, I'll end here with a playing deck that I just, playing card deck that I just got. This is the Bicycle Oreo. And it's a very pretty deck. On the backs of the cards, the faces of the cards are not so exciting, but the backs are really pretty. I think this is still being published. You can pick it up really easily through Amazon or on eBay. The pips are not custom, they're just basic, although the colors of the suits are pretty. But this deck is based on the way in which the golden rectangle was important to Leonardo da Vinci. So the jokers are Leonardo da Vinci, and you can see here how, you know, this is B and this is A, right? And then you've got the little rectangle. You can see how this keeps repeating and what this is starting to show us. And you all have seen this before, I think, because this is all over the internet. It's like a meme. What this is beginning to show us is this spiral that we associate with things like nautilus shells and all sorts of forms in nature, that the golden ratio keeps popping up in nature. And so this is what the Bicycle Playing Card Company says. Ooh, let's see if I can find this, the story card. Where is my story card? It's hiding in my box. It says, in the early 1500s, Leonardo da Vinci illustrated La Divina, the Divine Proportion, a book written by mathematician Luca Pacioli. This book described a mathematical theory called the golden ratio, that's what we've just been talking about, which was used in Renaissance paintings and sculptures to achieve balance and beauty. Da Vinci later called the sectio aurea, which is just Latin for like the golden section. He later called this the sectio aurea, or the golden section. The gold foil and swirl designs on the case, I'm talking about this, the back of the cards, bring the golden ratio to life in this unique deck of cards. The golden ratio. Here it is on a playing card deck. And this is why I think one of the reasons that sacred geometry and the golden ratio have become so important in discussions of tarot, because we're dealing with rectangles here. And so when you have something like the Millennium Edition, you have a playing card, a tarot card in this case, whose proportions are trying to embody the principle of the golden ratio. So this deck, I can never pronounce the name of the artist, but this deck, the Tarot de Marseille Millennium Edition, brings the kind of golden ratio, the golden section, the golden mean, to the construction of the cards. And the argument is that that construction was embedded in the historical Marseille deck, and we need to reconstruct it. This is also something that Ciro Marchetti has done with his Tarot Decoratif. So his Marseille, he quite deliberately put into it the principle of the golden ratio. And all of this is possible because, you know, playing cards are rectangles. So, hey, let's get golden with them. All right. I hope this made sense. I probably have to come back to some of this stuff. But one of the things I want to talk about is, you know, why I'm going gaga for playing cards right now, which has everything to do with this question of arrangement and the geometry of the card and how we read that and interpret that. And also I want to come back to the ways in which notions of the sacred relationship of parts, so sacred geometry, how that informs the three fundamental shapes that we see all over Rider-Waite-Smith decks as well as Marseille decks, circle, square, and triangle, how those three fundamental shapes carry in and of themselves esoteric meaning. Okay, enough for now. Sorry for the discontinuities. I'm looking at the image and the camera and realizing that I shifted the camera halfway through, and now you're seeing my yoga mats, my meditation mats, and filming. It's so complex. Okay, enough for now. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, thank you so much for your practice.